What's up, everybody? It's Marty here. I hope you all are very safe and healthy and keeping it all together mentally, which is probably one of the hardest things to do right now. But I'm really, really rooting for every one of you and myself and all my friends and family and all your friends and all your family and basically everybody. I don't know anybody who's having an easy time with all the insanity that's going on. But please just try to take care of yourself and take care of each other as best as you can, and listen to all the warnings and take things seriously, and hopefully we'll come out the other end of this thing really well and hopefully better off. But enough of that, and I wanted to choose an album, one of my albums, and talk about it and give you guys something to listen to. And give me something to think about other than the drum editing that I'm doing right now, which frankly is quite time-consuming, but coming out fantastic, and I'll give you more details about that later. Let's dig into something that I haven't really talked about in great detail in a long time, and please excuse the roughness of this podcast. There's going to be ums and ahs and bad edits, if any. I'm going to probably just wing it and see what happens and let it go as it is. But here we go. So my first solo album was Dragon's Kiss, and that would be I don't even remember what year it exactly is, in the late 80s, maybe 87 or 88, something like that. But the thing about that record was it was my first solo album, and I was asked to do it by Mike Varney, who was the president of Shrapnel Records. Still is, as far as I know. And really don't know why. I was in a band called Cacophony with Jason Becker at the time, and suddenly Mike comes up to me and says, "Why don't you guys both do solo records?" Which was odd because, it wasn't like Cacophony lit up the charts. It wasn't like we were Kiss and all of a sudden all the band members were going to do solo records. So it was very unusual for him to ask us to do that all of a sudden. But of course I was overjoyed to do it, despite the fact that I had absolutely no material. I pretty much shot my wad on the Speed Metal Symphony album by Cacophony. But to talk about Dragon's Kiss, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Jason Becker early in the early stage of the talk, because this was a really, really amazing time for him as far as his growth as an artist, a composer, a player, a musician, everything. I mean, it was really, really incredible. Little background on the Speed Metal Symphony album, which came just before this. This was really supposed to be my solo album. I had about 80% of it written, and just before I was about to finish, all the writing and get ready to record it, I met Jason Becker, and I just fell in love with the guy. No homo or anything like that, but I just fell in love with the guy. He played great. He had this little demo tape that, it wasn't really that good. There was a lot of disjointed ideas, but I could see that he was a decent guitarist from this demo tape, and he was only like 16 or maybe just turning 17. So I just thought I'd meet the guy. And when I met him, I was just blown away that he was such a down-to-earth, non-egotistical guy, because on his demo there was kind of like a bunch of rough ideas and weird things, and then all of a sudden he'd like just be flailing these super fast licks and stuff. So it sounded like your typical egotistical guitar player. So I was totally thrown aback when I met him, and he was the absolute opposite. And it turned out that he was a much better player than his demo showed. What I heard on his demo was like a lot of dexterity and a lot of ability, but not a whole lot of song ideas or melodies. So I really wasn't expecting much. And then when I met him, yeah, that's pretty much what he was like. However, when I showed him something, like something I'd been working on, even if it was completely alien to anything he'd played before, he would pick it up immediately and play it really nicely. And I'm like, wow, this is a super, super talent to have. So I was really kind of blown away by that. And like I said, I just fell in love with the guy. He was such a sweetheart. And we just hit it off right away. And we played, a bunch of stuff together. And it didn't take me long to figure out that if I was going to ever do my solo music with a band, this would be the guy to do it with, because not only could he relate to unusual concepts right away, he could play them quickly, and in many cases more accurately and more cleanly than I could. And so I just thought this guy was just a secret weapon. And my Cacophony record, well, it wasn't a Cacophony record at the time, it was my solo record, but I decided to make a band out of it and have Jason play in it and kind of make some room for Jason to play on the record. So I stretched out some guitar solos. I made single guitar solos, guitar battles, and carved out little sections for him. And there were a couple little ideas on his demo tape and things that he came up with that I found places for in the songs. And basically I just found room to have him do his thing, and also had him also double a lot of my parts and harmonize them. And we had so much fun playing those things together. The stuff that I had worked on for a long time, he learned it and we played it together. So it was like having a friend to do something that personal and that difficult that I spent so much time, having a pain in the ass doing and coming up with. It was so great to have a partner in crime. He would come up to my apartment in San Francisco, and we would go to the roof, sit on top of the roof downtown, and with little amps and just go over this stuff hundreds and hundreds of times. I mean, by the time we recorded the record, we could play most of that stuff in our sleep. And we kind of had to, because there was so little time to record that record, the Cacophony record. So I'm glad we were prepared. And so even though he didn't have a whole lot in the original writing of that record, his stamp is all over that. I mean, he played a lot on there, his sound is a lot on there, and some of his very primitive early ideas are on there. But the reason I bring this up is because when we both did solo records, I did Dragon's Kiss and he did Perpetual Burn, the leap that he made from that demo tape and the few things that he contributed to Speed Metal Symphony to what he came up with all by himself on Perpetual Burn in like maybe a year or less was just nothing short of completely unbelievable. It was really mind-boggling how he developed so much. And it wasn't like he developed so much because he was learning my stuff. He developed in a completely separate direction, his own direction. It wasn't like I was suddenly this big influence that he copied and took on his own. It was his own thing. I'm sure there are some things about our experience together that did influence him in some way, but if you listen to his music, it's so completely different from what I was doing and so incredibly evolved in such a short period of time. And you listen to something like Altitudes or Air especially, and I had no idea where that came from, and the ability to compose it and play it. I co-produced his album, but I really had an easy time of it. I basically, gave some kind of songwriting structure ideas, and that's about it. And I judged his guitar playing. You could do this better, or this is late, or this is early, but not really too much crazy hands-on stuff, because I was doing my own record at the exact same time. So it was really, we're both doing shifts. We're at the same studio in Cotati, California. It was on a farm. a place called Prairie Sun. Absolutely gorgeous piece of land, grass everywhere, and horses and chickens, and everybody had hay fever, and it was the middle of nowhere, but we got a lot done. So he was in the daytime and I was in the nighttime, so I was basically up for about 20 hours a day, and it was kind of hellish like that, but it was a wonderful experience. So back to Dragon's Kiss. I mean, in the nighttime I was doing my stuff, so I had to come up with music before I even started recording this record. So like I said, I had kind of blown my wad on Speed Metal Symphony, and that's a lot of ideas in there. So I had to start writing and writing and writing on my own, and I did most of the writing on a basic cassette recorder. I would put themes on it and put little arrangement ideas and maybe a couple solos and stuff like that, and each song came together like that. And then when I had a little kind of shadow of an idea of what I wanted to do, I would go to Jason's house, and he had a 4-track cassette recorder that I would use to come up with harmonies and just see what the song sounds like when things are double tracked and triple tracked and things like that, and have a little cheesy drum machine beat going on. And those drum machine beats didn't really help much, because when I got into rehearsals with Dean Castronovo, it was just basically me talking out of my head how I wanted the drums to be, and as soon as I give Dean a rough idea of what I wanted, he would come back with something 10,000 times better than what I had in mind. So the hard part was editing out, what I didn't need and what I did need. I mean, I loved everything he played, but it was really hard to choose what to cut out and what to keep, because he just kept giving me gems all the time. And on that 4-track that Jason had, the cool thing about it was a cassette. So if you record all 4 tracks and turn the cassette over, you can listen to tracks 3 and 4, and they'd be played backwards. And oftentimes, Jason would do this too, but oftentimes I would learn these things backwards, and they would come into some really unique finger twisting phrases and kind of mental trickery, and it really gives you a really interesting new voice, a new phrase. And it's not like that cheesy thing that they did in the late 60s where they would turn the tape upside down and have the guitar solo played backwards. I thought that was just so incredibly overdone and just such a time stamp that I really hated that. So what I did was actually learned the things backwards and tried to put that inflection, that weird thing that happens when you turn the tape upside down. I tried to learn that on guitar, and by doing that, accidentally, I would come into a few cool things. And I know Jason did that too. He did a lot of even cooler stuff than what I did with that. He would take that to a couple of levels further. But that was just one of the many little, mind games that we would do. And, I did Dragon's Kiss by myself, but I also employed Jason's help on there. And there's a couple songs where we did collaborations. But aside from the collaborations, I also had him play on other things, just like I did on his album Perpetual Burn. One great thing that we both learned about when we were recording our previous album, Cacophony, is that both of us have strengths and weaknesses, and luckily they overlap in such a way that we can take care of each other's weaknesses. And I don't want to say we had particular weaknesses, but there are some things that one was more not accomplished, but one was more appropriate for at that particular time. And from what I can remember, a lot of times I would have a phrase that it would just be a real insane phrase that I could play, and I could come up with it, But if I played it, it would be okay. But if Jason played it, it would be a little bit cleaner. And so I would write some of these things with Jason in mind to play. And that happened a couple times. And on the other side of it, oftentimes Jason would be doing a solo, and he wouldn't really know how he wanted to end it or start it, or there'd be a weak spot in the middle. And I was really good with ideas. I would always have a lot of different options for an intro, a middle, an ending, time changes, key changes, different kind of phrasings, different motifs and melodies. I was really, really quick to come up with a melody, a strong melody. And at that time, he was just really, really quick with just glistening technique. So together, if either one of us had like a particular problem with a passage, it was usually something that the other guy could fix. So I would say maybe 5 or 6 times each on my record and his record, we wound up employing each other. And that's not even counting the collaborations. I collaborated on a few songs on his record, and Jason collaborated on my songs as well. Like, for example, Jewel, you can hear the difference in our playing styles pretty well. And on Saturation Point, there's this sick part in the middle where it's all these 12-tone rows. And that's something that I kind of started when I was doing Cacophony, and Jason got wind of it and took it to like 3 levels farther. There was a song called Savage on the Cacophony record, and in the middle of that, there's this thing called a 12-tone row where you play notes chromatically, but you don't repeat any notes. And it can be quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Dissonant. And 99 times out of 100, it sounds like nonsense. But sometimes when you're searching for some nonsense, it's the perfect thing to do. It's like a go-to. But for the amount of work that it takes to get these things down and the amount of times you'll be using it in your life, it's really kind of a no-win situation. But if you're a total guitar nerd, it can be a lot of fun. And so I did that on Savage, and what I did was I came up with one 12-tone row, and I harmonized it with a completely different and unrelated, well, they're all unrelated, but another unrelated 12-tone row in the middle of the Savage solo, and that was the end of it. And then on my solo record, Dragon's Kiss, the song Saturation Point had a section in it where Jason wrote these 12-tone rows, and he harmonized them, but he also doubled it with some kind of delay, digital delay. I think it was a Boss digital delay pedal. So it was like doing this kind of tricky Van Halen thing on top of double harmonized 12-tone rows, which is like pretty much career suicide. If you have to explain your music, then you're in trouble. But it was pretty insane, and we were just like, thumping off in our hats about how cool we thought it was at the time. Listening back, it just sounds kind of funny, and I don't mind it, but I think it's cooler in concept than what it actually wound up being. And same thing goes with the Savage solo. But like at the time, we were just searching for new stuff. And some of that stuff is going to be, hopefully, epic classic stuff that's going to last for a long time. And some are just going to be little motifs that we tried, we put it out there, and there it was. And that's the 12-tone row thing that happened in Saturation Point. So that was one of the things that we collaborated on. And then I guess if I go down the list of the record, there's Dragon Mistress, which I still play today. It's kind of a simple song. One of the first songs maybe ever that I've heard, that I've played anyway, with a drop D guitar part in it. Back then, nobody was doing drop D things, and the song just happened to be in D, so I figured, why not drop the D? It wasn't any kind of big revelation. But the song, it was a very simple, basic rock song, and probably the type of song that if I had like 7 or 8 more of them, would have been better for my career back then. But for me, that was like the sellout type of song. It was like a 4/4 beat with. Even then, I had a time change right in the middle of it, which probably ruined all the chances of any kind of commercial success. But still, I enjoyed it, and I still enjoy playing it now. And when I play it now, sometimes I bring random people from the audience on stage to play it with me. I mean, that's how simple the song is. You can just take anybody and they can play it. So, but that's how a song should be, really. I mean, if you want to relate to a lot of people that get excited about guitar and guitar music, they're just starting. That's when you're the most pumped about it. That's when you're so excited about it. So if you can speak to those people, that's what it's really all about. And if you can speak to those people and at the same time do something that is cool and fresh and inspires you who's playing it, or me who's playing it in this case, that's the ultimate. And that's pretty much been the challenge of everything from when I started till now. And hopefully I've gotten a little bit better at that over the years, and become able to inspire people to enjoy music, not just because of its mechanical merit. At the time, it was my first solo record, and Jason was, 17 or 18. So both of us were just like, mechanically, this is amazing. But even then, we were both ahead of that. We knew that mechanics could be done by anybody, but we wanted to do something that no one did. We both shared that, and that was another thing that I loved about being able to have someone who shared that. We both had definitely our share of mechanics, but it was not the top of our priorities to show people that that's what we were about. Because what we were about was trying to do kind of new melodies, and melodies that were inspired by things that are not the typical inspirations. I mean, a lot of the things that inspired us at the time were like Stravinsky and Isaïe and maybe Rachmaninoff and Philip Glass was a big one, and that's one that Jason turned me on to. And I pretty much got more into it than he was initially. He kind of went more into the straight ahead classical stuff, but once I heard the Philip Glass music, that was it for a while, and I pretty much plagiarized a lot of that on the first Cacophony record. But so those were some things that weren't commonly copied by a lot of the guitar hero types back then. And then, of course, I had a big Asian influence when it comes to melodies and when it comes to phrasing and vocalizing on a guitar. I did a lot of emulating of Chinese instruments and Japanese vocals and Indian instruments and Persian instruments. I found so much of that to bite into, and that also made things kind of weird and sometimes dissonant, but sometimes romantic and very sappy in a way that I really like it. And so that's kind of what kept us away from the traditional guitar hero stuff. Well, a lot of guys back then were just learning things that were traditionally difficult on guitar and mastering them, and did really well with that. I mean, a lot of people dig it, so but Jason and I were on sort of a different page with that. And the next song on the record, I'm looking at it here, Evil Thrill. I don't remember much about that, which means I haven't played it probably since I recorded it. I feel like I played it in Europe on like some radio shows playing along with a backing track or something like that, but never really played it live. But it reminds me that at the end of the song, there was a cool section that I liked, and it was hard to really define the guitars. The mix was really difficult. Of course, back then I had no idea how to record so many guitars in such a short period of time and try to get sounds that allow the other sounds to exist with each other. You know, you just put up a mic and go and start overlaying and overlaying. And it didn't help that at the time, for whatever reason, I was really into the sound of stacking up rhythm guitars, distorted rhythm guitars. Even punk bands back then were stacking up these rhythms, and it just sounded great. I learned later on in life that you could get a great rhythm guitar sound by just putting one on the left and one on the right. If you got great tone, that should be enough. But back then I was like, let's stack 8 rhythm guitars and play them super tightly and just make this big wall of rhythms. And so I did that, and I mixed the whole record, Dragon's Kiss, like that. I mixed it just like rhythm mania, and it was crazy because, frankly, I mean, I'm a much better lead player than I am rhythm, and my rhythms are way less interesting than my melodies or my leads. But for some reason, at that period of time, I was so into like stacking these rhythms that they pretty much covered up a lot of the leads, which I spent the majority of the time working on and recording. And so when I turned the record into Varney, I'm like, this is great, listen to this record. Never heard anything like it. He hated it. He couldn't hear any of the leads. It was just all of these overdubbed rhythms, and they were fat. I mean, they were thick as hell, and they felt really good. Fuzzy and all that. And it was like, you know, like when you hear a rapper and they've got this really cool beat and groove going on, and then all of a sudden they start talking over it. It's like, why would you do that over such a cool thing? And it happens in death metal a lot with the vocals. They've got these amazing riffs, and then there's just some like Cookie Monster stuff over it. It's like, oh my God, that lick is so cool. Why would you cover it up? And but everybody has the reasons. And at that time, I was just so in love with the stacking of distorted rhythms. If you listen to this record by a group called Apocrypha that I produced at that time, the record was called The Eyes of Time. I found another ally in that rhythm stacking department, the guitar player Tony Fredinelli, who's a fantastic player. Got on train with me with that whole, he got on board with me in that whole rhythm stacking thing. And there's like stuff where we're stacking like 10 rhythms, and he played them super tight, and it feels so good. And we wouldn't give in. We just turned in the record, and that's how it was. But on Dragon's Kiss, I turned in the record, and Varney hated it. He just like, dude, you've got to remix it. And Varney's not famous for spending any more money than is necessary when it comes to producing a record. So the fact that he wanted me to go back in and remix the whole record was a pretty strong statement about how the rhythms were too loud. And somewhere there's a cassette of that mix, but I'm sure it's in a vault somewhere in storage. I haven't heard it since back then. I was really bummed out. But then when I remixed the record and remixed it, and so you could hear the leads, it probably turned into a better record. But still, even then, I don't think it sounds all that great. I mean, back then, I don't want to say state of the art, but it was state of the art considering that you had 2 weeks to record it and nothing but gear that is borrowed and no money and little production, nothing. So it sounded okay, but the sound of it is a little bit rough around the edges, and it's been remastered, and there was a Japanese remaster. It didn't help much, but it's what it was. It sounds exactly like it did back then, and you know, there's still moments on it that I like. And if I keep going down the songs, maybe I'll do that. I'll keep going down the songs, and then I'll wind this up for the few of you who are still listening to this. Then I went into a song called Namida, which means tears in Japanese. And all I can remember about that is it was one of the first times I used a synthesizer. They had this really archaic synthesizer in the studio, and it kind of made this raindrop type of sound. And I thought it was really cool, and decided to write an intro using this sound, this synthesizer raindrop type of sound. And it was a really nice little ballad, and a ballad that turns into a very strong theme, which I'm sure I was heavily inspired by some kind of traditional Chinese classical music or Chinese opera music, which I was getting into big time back then. I would go to Chinatown in San Francisco and just buy random cassettes, and every once in a while I would find like a passage in there that just spoke to me, and I would just lift it. First of all, I'd learn it, and then if I liked it as it was, that's what I would keep. But usually I would change things about it. I would make the chord progression a little different. I would voice the guitars different. And I came up with a lot of stuff that way. And just from picking up random cassettes and listening to them, just absorbing things and really absorbing things that probably not a whole lot of people were absorbing. Not a whole lot of rock guitarists back then were absorbing that stuff. And even in China, rock guitar wasn't a thing. So Chinese kids who grew up on that stuff weren't playing guitar that way. So thankfully it's different now, and there are some great rock players in China and players of everything over there. But back then, it was very weird. So that's how Namida came about. And then the next song is Anvils, which at the end of that song, there's a rhythm that's super stacked. That was the sound I loved. That sound of rhythms being stacked. I could have looped that ending and listened to it forever. And actually, I did a live version of that song in one of my tours where the ending was just super long. And I'm sure the people in the audience were like either digging it or like, fuck this, let's leave, because it was just really annoyingly long, but it just feels so good. And I just love to loop things that feel good. And so that's that. And then there's Jewel, which is basically a song that Jason and I wrote. We both loved it. And one of us had to use it on our record, and one of us was gonna not be able to. So I think we bet on a 49ers game, and I won the bet, and I got to keep it on my record. But I think Jason's playing is so much smoother than mine on that song. It probably, I don't want to say it would have been better on his record, because who's to say what's better and what's not, but it wasn't necessary to do two guys on it. You know, he could have done great with it himself. I could have done great with it myself. But since we both wrote it, it was great to have him play on it. And yeah, I got lucky. We both loved that song, and he just played gorgeously on it. And the next song is Forbidden City. And I think that's probably my favorite song on the record, and the only song that really, honestly, in my opinion, stands up now. And just because it's kind of rad. I mean, it's really rad. If I'm proud of anything on that record, it's that song. There's just so much of what I try to do musically in that song. It's got a strong, solid riff hook to it. It's got a really melancholy solo, chances for very many melancholy solos. It's got a lot of, valleys and mountains. It's got very aggressive things in it. All the things kind of lead to each other. It's not just a bunch of random tangents stuck together. Everything leads from one to the other, and there are very, very strong themes and motifs in it. And it's just an absolute beast of a song. And it's kind of a tradition, really. On all my records since then, there've always been like a beast on every record that, you dread playing it because there's so much to play, and you dread mixing it because there's so many moves in it, and you just dread it. It's the ones the engineers hate, and by the time I'm finished playing it, I'm really, really, really hating it, but loving it that it's done. And on every album, there's been one of those. Like on Wall of Sound, it was Self-Pollution. On Inferno, it was the title track. There's one on every record. But I remember on Dragon's Kiss, the Forbidden City tracking was insane. Dean Castronovo's drum part. Listen to that song. I mean, this was way before Pro Tools. And there wasn't a whole lot of punching in on drums back then either. You don't punch in a whole drum set that much. I mean, you can get away with it a couple times, but sometimes it can get really unnatural. So Dean was so good, he could, play through a whole song and not worry about punching in much. But I think Forbidden City is like 7 or 8 minutes long, and it's all insane drumming, just really insane. And he did it in one go. I don't remember punching in there, but there was a section in there where he was a little bit off time. I remember this. We were all really excited because he nailed it. And then I remember hating to have to tell him that there was one section that we couldn't punch it in and fix it. It's one thing getting into a punch, but it's hard to get out of a punch and keep the remainder of the performance. It's impossible. Well, not impossible, but very, very unlikely. It's just easier to play the whole thing again, as difficult as that is. So Dean was a trooper. He played the entire song a few more times, and it was probably the most intense drum performance I'd ever seen, all in one go, and he nailed it. And then on top of that, I played all of my guitars and bass, and then the dreaded day of mixing that song came up, and I still remember, the engineer Dino Alden, who was an absolute genius. You couldn't automate everything back then. There were certain things that you could automate, but there was just a ton of moves to do. And he only had 2 hands to do it, and he had to do it in real time. So I remember also myself getting on the board and making mix moves and just doing so much engineering stuff just to make sure that it was able to be mixed in one go on the fly. It was really, really hair-raising, and it probably took, several goes to get all the moves. And I think there's a couple moves that we missed that were not crucial to the song that we left in. Mistakes, mix mistakes, stereo panning, things like that. And so that was brutal. And then the last song on the record was Thunder March, which I still play now. And that's one song that kind of is associated with me, but I still don't think I've got it right yet. One of these days in my life, I will get that thing right. The right arrangement, the right interpretation, whether it be with a full orchestra or whether it be with a band with a string section, or it just needs to be right. I mean, it's a solid melody and there's some really nice parts. And even the version on Dragon's Kiss has its moments. It has some nice moments in it. And then I did it again on my Scenes record with an extremely insufficient sonic palette, so to speak. And even then, there are some moments on it, but it's certainly not the ultimate interpretation of it. And there's probably a couple other versions of that in existence, and I've played it live for years. But even that didn't make it to the live album. I cut it out. That song is going to exist in its proper version sometime in the future. I started to work on a classical version. I played it on gut string and had an orchestral arrangement and started to come out really good. Then I started to listen to it and I'm like, this sounds like a wine commercial. And then I dumped the whole project. It just wasn't right. It wasn't right, you know, and it's just one of those things. It deserves the right interpretation. So maybe if there's some of you out there listening and you're able to do an arrangement on your home recording system or whatever, I see it being a traditional orchestral piece, maybe with some guitar in it, or a rock version with a heavy emphasis on strings. But I don't really think that distorted guitar fits so great in a total orchestral setting. And I've tried it several times and I've heard a lot of people do it, and it's okay to some extent, but I think if it was great, everybody'd be doing it all the time. There's a reason why it doesn't happen, but I could be totally wrong. It's just one dirtbag's opinion. But I don't see that song that way. I see it either a complete orchestra with another instrument being the lead instrument, say a violin or a cello, or trading off between several instruments or piano. But I'm not really sure. Maybe one of you guys out there can do something to take that song where it needs to be. And I'm certainly very, very open to hearing a nice interpretation of that. And it would save me a lot of work because I've tried so many times. But anyway, this has been a long go for one breath. And I hope you got some enjoyment out of it. It was kind of fun for me to think about this stuff. It's been a long time, and I'm really impressed when people say they enjoy this record and they know the record, because it was a long time ago, and I'm onto a lot of different things, but they were all very much rooted in that record, Dragon's Kiss. So I'm going to do a couple more of these things probably, if you like this one, and keep asking me questions and stuff. Hopefully I got to some of your questions with this, I'll do a couple of other records like this. And please stay safe and take care of yourself first. Like they say in airplanes, take care of yourself first and then everybody else around you. Just be careful and don't do things that are not necessary for a while, and just do the best you can. And I really appreciate every single one of you and your support over all these years. And I got new stuff coming, but I'm not going to talk about it now because of a million other boring reasons. But it's something to look forward to, and it's coming along really, 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 really good. So for now, just take care of yourselves, and lots of love from me, and talk soon.